Meghan Markle being weird and inauthentic.
She's been mocked at Paris Fashion Week.
The lights of Paris reflected off the cobblestones, casting long shadows over the Palais de Tokyo, where fashion royalty and celebrities had gathered. The cameras flashed incessantly, journalists whispered, and every movement carried weight. Then she arrived. Meghan Markle, poised, confident, dressed in what looked from afar like a statement of power, elegance, and authority. Her black heels clicked against the marble floor as she entered the Balenciaga front row. Publicly, the moment seemed perfect. Flashes popped, the lights reflected just right, and every editor there dreamed of a cover shot capturing her. A duchess, making her Paris debut, ready for the world to see her rebirth. But behind the velvet ropes, things were very different. Before we begin today's royal update, I want to take a quick moment. Many of you watch these videos but haven't subscribed yet, and you don't want to miss the latest developments and fascinating stories from the world of royalty. Subscribing is completely free and keeps you up to date as everything unfolds. And while you're here, let us know where are you watching from. Share it in the comments. It's wonderful to see viewers joining us from around the world. The first whispers started almost immediately. Stylists and insiders exchanged glances. One designer leaned toward a colleague, barely audible. "It feels off." Smiles were forced, energy restrained, and the subtle chill in the air was unmistakable. It wasn't hostility exactly. It was caution, calculation, a collective hesitation to embrace her presence. Editors who normally jostled for selfies gave space, keeping their distance. Everyone seemed aware that the optics of proximity mattered as much as the fashion itself. And for some reason, Meghan's arrival had shifted the balance. A stylist later admitted, when she walked in, the room froze. People weren't welcoming her, they were watching, judging, almost measuring her. And that measured gaze carried a weight she hadn't anticipated. Backstage, the tension grew. Rumors began to circulate, first subtle, then louder. A comment here, a whisper there. Her perfume, it's cheap, layered over stress. Another voice suggested, the glam team is exhausted, they've tried everything, but nothing fixes it. Jokes about her presence spread among assistants and stylists. Was it exaggeration, or was there a kernel of truth? No one could tell, but the effect was immediate. Attention shifted. The runway became secondary. Meghan herself had become the story. A borrowed couture piece, tags still attached, no tailoring, no custom adjustments, subtle but sharp signals of status. Unlike other celebrities invited and gifted by the house, she would have to return the pieces after the show. Every stitch and fabric choice carried a coded message. She wasn't fully inside the Parisian elite circle, and she knew it. Despite the whispers and muted energy, Meghan projected confidence. Cameras flashed. She smiled. She posed. She appeared untouchable. But backstage, observers noted the contrast was stark. The aura she carried publicly didn't align with the one perceived by those watching closely. People were cautious, keeping distance, whispering to each other. In an industry built on proximity, networking, and the subtle signaling of alliances, being avoided was perhaps the most powerful rejection possible. Not with words, but with spacing, gestures, and silence. Meghan's intended moment of cultural relevance, the glamorous reset, the media-friendly return to Paris, was already facing complications. Fashion insiders spoke candidly to reporters later, describing the mood as cold, measured, and uneasy. It wasn't about rudeness, but it was about perception. The kind of perception that can define careers, shift social hierarchy, and reshape narratives. The contrast between public appearance and backstage reality became immediate fodder for speculation. Was Meghan aware of the subtle cues around her? Did she sense the distance, the whispered commentary, the careful calibration of where cameras and designers were looking? Or was she entirely focused on her own narrative, the image she projected, the smile she offered to the outside world? From the audience perspective, she looked poised. From insider accounts, she seemed isolated. By the first hour, the chatter had grown. Some people joked about her aura, others speculated on more mundane things. Nerves, tension, unfamiliarity with the environment. But the psychological weight of whispers in Paris Fashion Week was more potent than any overt criticism. The energy of the room had shifted, quietly but unmistakably. Cameras continued to click, but even the photographers, usually eager for dramatic images, seemed subdued. They captured pictures, but not the enthusiastic frenzy expected of a duchess stepping into the epicenter of fashion. In the elite circles of Paris, Silence and restraint often communicate more than applause. And for Meghan, that silence began speaking volumes. Her entrance had set the tone, but it was the subtleties that mattered most. Backstage gossip painted a picture of disconnection, of a tension that was wary rather than welcoming. Observers remarked on her posture, her expressions, the faint tension in her gestures. Designers, stylists, and assistants all seemed conscious of the layers of influence, hierarchy, and signaling that she had disrupted simply by being present. The moment that should have been a triumphant Parisian arrival instead carried a subtle, pervasive tension that lingered long after the flashbulbs faded. And in Paris, where fashion is power, perception is currency, and image is everything, this first hour would set the stage for all that followed. By the end of the evening, the whispers had spread, the aura of scrutiny thickened, and the contrast between public image and backstage reality was clear. The story was no longer about the runway. It was about Meghan herself, poised, polished, yet quietly contested in the eyes of those whose judgment truly mattered. She had arrived seeking admiration, but Paris, in its measured, precise, and unforgiving way, had already begun reshaping the narrative around her presence. As the night wore on, backstage energy thickened with unease. Stylists whispered, assistants exchanged worried glances, and even photographers seemed hesitant, hovering at a distance. Meghan Markle, maintaining her poised smile, navigated the maze of mirrors and garment racks. To the casual observer, it was a typical Fashion Week scene: chaos, lights, and last-minute adjustments. But insiders described a more intense atmosphere. Moment she stepped behind the curtains, one stylist said, you could feel it, everything shifted, conversations halted, eyes darted, and the air itself seemed heavier. Rumors spread quickly, fueled by a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Some whispered about her perfume, an odd mix that insiders claimed overpowered the room. Others speculated on subtle gestures, the way she moved, and the aura she projected. It was intangible yet palpable. In Paris, such whispers don't stay quiet. They ripple, amplify, and transform perception. Meanwhile, the borrowed couture, tag still attached, created a quiet storm. In fashion circles, exclusivity is power, and the fact that Meghan wore samples instead of custom pieces sent a subtle but unmistakable message. She wasn't fully part of the inner circle. Editors noted the contrast sharply. Where other celebrities were embraced, photographed, and styled to highlight both garment and personal influence, Meghan's appearance drew distance. Observers reported awkward pauses and side glances, a chorus of muted reactions that contrasted sharply with the public-facing glamour. A stylist commented, "The room tolerated her presence, but she didn't belong." And in Paris, that's noticed immediately. In the fashion world, tolerance is rarely enough. Acceptance is currency, and Meghan was short on both. The whispers soon spilled beyond backstage. Social media caught every subtle cue. Photos of Meghan standing slightly apart, surrounded by empty spaces where peers usually gathered, circulated rapidly. Online threads dissected posture, proximity, and expressions. TikTok edits juxtaposed her alone with other stars embraced by designers, captions reading borrowed couture and Paris exposed. By the second day, public fascination had shifted. It wasn't about her outfit. It wasn't about Balenciaga's runway. It was about her presence, her perception, and the whispers that amplified with each image shared. Paris had a reputation for subtlety and precision, but even subtle cues can become loud when repeated, analyzed, and magnified online. The tension escalated further when news of Meghan's drive through the Alma tunnel emerged. A photographer captured her leaving the venue, traveling through the same tunnel where Princess Diana tragically died decades earlier. At first, the route seemed coincidental, the fastest path back to her hotel. But insiders suggested otherwise, noting her extensive study of Diana's life, biography, and public moments. The symbolism was undeniable to those aware of the history, and speculation erupted online instantly. TikTok clips paired her car passing through the tunnel with haunting footage of Diana, set to somber music, triggering a wave of commentary, memes, and outrage. Some labeled it manipulative, others called it unintentional but tone-deaf. The whispers backstage suddenly became a public spectacle, echoing far beyond Paris. Compounding the issue was the contradiction between her humanitarian image and the brand she promoted. Meghan had been celebrated for advocating child protection online, yet Balenciaga's controversial runway, including troubling imagery involving children, raised uncomfortable questions. Commentators and fashion insiders alike noted the dissonance. "You're promoting protection while appearing alongside brands under scrutiny," one insider remarked. Social media amplified this point relentlessly, framing the Paris appearance as a clash between intent and perception. The borrowed couture, the whispers, and now the tunnel symbolism converged to create a narrative difficult to ignore. Every move Meghan made, every smile, every pose became material for interpretation. Public scrutiny intensified when attention turned to the network choice for her primetime interviews. Critics highlighted the connection to CBS, the same network that had aired Diana's final moments decades earlier. "She condemns media exploitation yet collaborates with the network that profited from tragedy," a media analyst wrote, and the observation went viral. This intersection of fashion, media, and symbolism magnified tension exponentially. Paris insiders noted the irony was almost theatrical. While Meghan projected confidence, every action, her route through the tunnel, the borrowed couture, the brand partnerships, was scrutinized, amplified, and debated. Her team reportedly scrambled to control narratives, but the whispers had become too loud, spilling from Backstage into global discourse. By the third day, Paris had transformed from a backdrop of glamour to a stage for critique and cultural observation. Fashion insiders claimed designers intentionally kept distance, sending a cold shoulder signal. Images of Meghan alone, photos of her interacting minimally with peers, circulated widely, fueling online debates. One editor reportedly told colleagues, "It's not a rejection of her as a person, it's a statement about credibility and influence. Paris sees it all." And the city's perception mattered. In fashion, proximity, endorsements, and cultural acceptance dictate influence. Being tolerated rather than embraced signaled vulnerability and risk. Meghan's intended moment of revival, the poised, glamorous entrance, was increasingly reframed as miscalculation. By the evening, social media had turned Paris Fashion Week into a spectacle of whispers, memes, and critique. Online, observers dissected every frame, every glance, every empty space in front row images. Parisian photographers who usually courted celebrities were reticent, and insiders noted a pervasive sense of caution among staff. It wasn't personal hostility, it was strategic calculation, a collective assessment of credibility and status. The juxtaposition of borrowed couture, whispered commentary, and the haunting symbolism of the Alma Tunnel had created a perfect storm. For Meghan, the public-facing confidence contrasted sharply with Backstage and global scrutiny, making her Paris debut one of the most dissected and debated appearances in recent fashion history. And as the night drew to a close, the whispers became a chorus. Silence in the corridors of Paris Fashion Week spoke louder than applause. It wasn't rejection outright, it was a recalibration of perception. For someone who had relied on image, narrative, and influence, the experience left her position precarious. Paris had accepted her presence, but it had rejected the aura she tried to project. And in the city that crowns icons and exposes miscalculations, that distinction was fatal. By the fourth day of Paris Fashion Week, whispers had morphed into headlines, and Backstage chatter had erupted into public spectacle. Social media, always rapid, became a relentless echo chamber. Every photograph, every clip, every fleeting glance from the event was dissected across platforms. #Paris Exposed continued to trend. TikTok edits juxtaposed Meghan Markle in borrowed couture with other icons fully embraced by designers, captions reading borrowed couture and empty chair energy. Online communities debated intent, interpretation, and symbolism, weaving a narrative that expanded far beyond fashion commentary. Paris, a city that prides itself on taste and discretion, had become a global theater, and Meghan was both the lead performer and the subject under interrogation. Meanwhile, the Alma Tunnel episode gained a new layer of scrutiny. Journalists and commentators explored every possible angle: coincidence, symbolism, or deliberate homage. Former aides and royal historians weighed in on broadcasts, analyzing the route choice alongside Meghan's known fascination with Diana. "There's no way she wouldn't know the history of that tunnel," one commentator insisted on live television. Insider reports suggested Meghan's own team scrambled, issuing statements emphasizing the fastest route back to the hotel. Yet the explanation seemed hollow against the relentless spread of online narratives. To many observers, it appeared calculated, an attempt to intertwine legacy, symbolism, and personal branding. And in Paris, perception is power. As the media storm swirled, palace-style intrigue surfaced in parallel. Sources claimed Prince Harry's team privately expressed concern over the optics. Courtiers reportedly cautioned that Paris, unlike other cities, could interpret symbolism with deadly precision, linking Meghan's choices to broader questions about credibility, strategy, and influence. One insider described hushed late-night calls, urgent emails, and the sense of crisis management unfolding in real time. Allegedly, Harry was caught between defending his wife and navigating a cultural landscape he did not fully control. Every move was a potential misstep, every photograph a potential headline. The tension resembled classic palace intrigue, appearances curated, alliances calculated, perception constantly monitored. It was a theater of optics and whispers, magnified through social media and global press. Adding fuel to the fire, industry insiders highlighted contradictions between Meghan's public persona and her Paris conduct. Promoting humanitarian work while attending a show featuring controversial imagery, paired with borrowed couture, painted a picture of discord. "The narrative she projects doesn't match the reality of the room," one stylist remarked. Editors noted body language, subtle gestures, and interactions, or the lack thereof with other high-profile figures. Photographers observed her isolated in lobbies, standing alone amidst otherwise lively groups. Social media amplified these visuals, with captions emphasizing distance and lack of acceptance. Parisian fashion insiders reportedly saw this as a test of cultural legitimacy, a measure of influence that Meghan failed to pass. Rumors of backstage tension leaked into the press with uncanny speed. Stylists, assistants, and journalists shared anecdotes anonymously, describing an air of unease surrounding Meghan's presence. "She wants control, but she can't command the room," one insider said. Comparisons to Diana's effortless authenticity emerged repeatedly. Diana's elegance was intuitive, her charisma organic, while Meghan's projected image felt, to some observers, constructed and calculated. These comparisons were amplified online, intensifying discussion across continents. Memes juxtaposing Diana's public appearances with Meghan's Paris moments circulated widely, framing the Duchess as a shadow attempting to imitate a legacy she could never fully inhabit. In parallel, the CBS connection resurfaced in conversation. Observers recalled the network's broadcast of Diana's final hours, then juxtaposed it with Meghan and Harry's high-profile interviews. Analysts, journalists, and fans debated credibility, intention, and optics, creating a feedback loop that intensified scrutiny. The combination of borrowed couture, tunnel symbolism, and media contradictions made Paris Fashion Week less about garments and more about identity, narrative, and public trust. Fashion, once an arena of visual storytelling, had become a theater of influence and legitimacy. Every action Meghan took, whether intentional or perceived, was now a line in a global narrative about authenticity, power, and perception. By midweek, the spectacle reached fever pitch. Parisian tabloids, international outlets, and social media influencers amplified each whisper, rumor, and image. Editors noted that designers strategically avoided close proximity to Meghan, creating subtle but visually striking gaps in photographs. Publicists reportedly advised clients to maintain distance. Every image, every observation was a potential story. Fans debated intent, with some defending her poise while others questioned authenticity. The palace-style intrigue intensified as speculation spread about Harry's role, advisors, interventions, and whether public perception could be steered back under control. Every message, statement, and movement was scrutinized, dissected, and circulated. By the final day, it was clear Paris had delivered a verdict. Whispers backstage had exploded into headlines, borrowed couture had become meme fodder, and the tunnel symbolism had triggered a cultural conversation impossible to ignore. Social media, fashion editors, and industry insiders converged on a narrative. Meghan's public image, carefully curated for years, now faced a harsh test. The city that crowns icons had reframed her story. Observers commented not just on garments or gestures, but on credibility, influence, and the interplay between personal branding and public perception. And while Meghan maintained her outward composure, the undercurrent of tension, backstage, online, and in whispers across Paris, marked a profound shift. The spectacle was not merely fashion. It was a cultural moment, a public trial, and a stage for palace-style intrigue unfolding in real time. As Paris Fashion Week drew to a close, the echoes of whispers, memes, and viral clips had transformed into a full-blown narrative that extended far beyond the city. What began as an attempt at a glamorous comeback for Meghan Markle had metastasized into a multi-layered spectacle, scrutinized by fashion insiders, social media, royal watchers, and global audiences alike. The borrowed couture, Alma Tunnel symbolism, and CBS contradiction were no longer isolated incidents. They were threads woven into a tapestry that questioned authenticity, influence, and personal branding. The City of Light had delivered its verdict, but the ramifications were only beginning to unfold. Reports from insiders suggested that the Duchess's team immediately recognized the shift in perception. Doors that once opened for private meetings and brand partnerships were now hesitant, guarded, or closed entirely. Designers who might have sought her presence for mutual prestige reportedly opted to distance themselves, subtly signaling to the fashion world that Meghan's aura was no longer fully aligned with elite Parisian taste. Stylists, publicists, and advisors scrambled to contain the fallout, issuing carefully worded statements, arranging press-friendly appearances, and recalibrating upcoming projects. Yet, for every mitigation strategy, the viral threads, memes, and whispers persisted, moving faster than any PR team could control. The narrative had escaped containment. Simultaneously, royal and media analysts began parsing the palace-style implications. Paris had not only tested Meghan's cultural and fashion legitimacy, it had indirectly scrutinized the alignment between her public persona and her historical narrative. By referencing Diana's legacy through both imagery and personal symbolism, Meghan inadvertently triggered a global debate on legacy, authenticity, and credibility. Former aides and royal correspondents highlighted the irony of advocating for media accountability while collaborating with outlets historically criticized for exploiting tragedy. The juxtaposition of public advocacy and perceived hypocrisy became a focal point for commentary, and Harry's role was scrutinized anew, with questions raised about strategy, judgment, and influence. The long-term consequences began to crystallize in real time. Online communities solidified opinions, social media algorithms amplified critiques, and the industry quietly recalibrated expectations. Streaming platforms, brands, and media partners reportedly assessed partnerships with a renewed focus on credibility and cultural resonance. Sources suggested that some executives expressed caution in committing to high-profile collaborations, fearing public backlash or perceived opportunism. This extended beyond Paris or fashion. Hollywood, philanthropy, and entertainment sectors all appeared attuned to the shift, reinforcing the idea that public perception can influence both personal and professional capital. Reputation, once carefully constructed, was under reappraisal. In parallel, cultural commentators framed the narrative as a lesson in authenticity and alignment. Paris, a city synonymous with refined taste and symbolic scrutiny, had become a proving ground, highlighting the delicate balance between image projection and audience reception. Observers noted that borrowed garments, isolated photographs, and unintended symbolism collectively undermined the curated image, creating a story of tension, contradiction, and scrutiny. Analysts argued that while Paris had not ruined Meghan, it had exposed vulnerabilities, gaps between intent, perception, and historical awareness. Those gaps, magnified by global platforms, reshaped her narrative in ways both subtle and profound. Ultimately, the week concluded not with applause or admiration, but with reflection, reassessment, and the heavy weight of scrutiny. Meghan Markle departed Paris carrying more than couture. She carried a cultural lesson on perception, credibility, and the consequences of symbolic choices. Social media, industry insiders, and commentators had collectively codified a narrative in which image, intent, and legacy intersected, producing both critique and conversation. For Prince Harry, the spectacle was equally instructive, illustrating the complexities of public partnership, historical consciousness, and narrative control. Paris had tested not only fashion and glamour, but strategy, symbolism, and influence at the highest level. By the final night, the narrative arc reached its dramatic resolution. Paris had not silenced Meghan. She had not disappeared from public view. Instead, the city had forced confrontation with reality. The gap between curated image and public perception, between historical homage and unintended symbolism, between aspiration and credibility. Fashion insiders observed, commentators weighed in, and social media communities amplified the story's lessons. Perception is as powerful as action, legacy cannot be borrowed, and symbolism carries weight far beyond intention. Every meme, whispered critique, and viral clip became part of the record, a lasting imprint on public consciousness. And so the story concluded with clarity. Meghan Markle's Paris Fashion Week appearance, initially framed as a triumphant return, had evolved into a masterclass in cultural scrutiny and consequence. Whispers had become headlines, symbolism had sparked debate, and perception had reshaped the narrative entirely. The borrowed couture, the Alma Tunnel, and the CBS connections remained more than isolated moments. They became catalysts for reflection, critique, and long-term evaluation. As the lights dimmed on Paris Fashion Week, the lesson was clear. In a world where global attention meets historical consciousness, every move is magnified, every choice interpreted, and every image analyzed. Glamour and influence are never guaranteed. Credibility must be earned, preserved, and understood.